My daughter-in-law smiled right at me across that table and said, "Don't pile your plate too high, Victoria. It's not like you're paying for any of this." I set down my fork. Slowly. The way you set something down when you've already decided what happens next. Then I picked up my coat, kissed no one, and walked straight out of the restaurant. 31 minutes later, her card got declined. The bill was $520. She had no idea I'd pre-authorized every single dollar of it. And at the moment I walked out, I called the manager and said, "Release the hold. My name is Victoria Harmon. I'm 64 years old. I own my home outright. And for 3 years, I let a woman make me feel like a guest in it." This is the story of how that ended. The restaurant was called Cypress and Salt. One of those places with cloth napkins folded into swans, and a sommelier who actually knows what he's talking about. My son Daniel and his wife Nicole were seated across from me. We were celebrating, supposedly, their 4th anniversary. My idea, my booking, my credit card on file weeks before. I hadn't told them that part. I'd wanted it to feel generous, not transactional. That was my first mistake. Being generous in secret to people who needed to believe the generosity was theirs. I just lifted my fork toward the beef tenderloin when Nicole leaned forward, voice low enough to sound private, but loud enough for the 2 tables nearby to hear. "Don't overdo it, Victoria. You didn't pay for this." She paused. Then she added, "Let us actually enjoy it." There it was. Not the first time, not even close. But something about the way she said us made the air go thin. Like I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. Here's what nobody tells you about that kind of moment. It doesn't make you angry right away. First, it makes you numb. Then, it makes you very, very clear. I stood up, got my coat from the back of the chair, and walked out without a word. My heart was hammering. My hands were cold. I kept my face completely neutral all the way through the lobby, all the way to the parking lot, all the way to my car. And then I sat there for a full minute just breathing. Then I called the restaurant. "Hi, this is Victoria Harmon. I placed a credit card authorization on reservation number 4417 for this evening. I'm going to need you to release that hold. I've stepped out for the night." The manager was professional. He understood immediately. I drove home to the brick house that my late husband Gerald and I spent 11 years renovating by hand. The house where I still lived on the main floor, while Daniel and Nicole occupied the in-law suite upstairs. Rent-free, utilities-free for 34 months. The quiet in the kitchen that night didn't feel empty. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken in a long time. My phone buzzed at 9:47 p.m. Nicole. I didn't pick up. Then Daniel. Then Nicole again. Then Daniel, voice frantic on the voicemail. "Mom, what happened? They're saying the card didn't go through. We had to borrow from Nicole's coworker. It's embarrassing. Just call me back." I turned the phone face down and made chamomile tea. Here's something worth understanding about what I'd just done because it matters. I had not frozen anyone's account. I had not tricked anyone. I had simply removed an authorization I had placed voluntarily with my own money. That is entirely legal. That is entirely within any person's rights. When someone gives a gift, they can choose not to give it. The restaurant had my card on file as a courtesy hold, not a promise. The moment I withdrew my presence from that dinner, the legal basis for that hold was gone. They paid their own bill that night. First time in 3 years they'd paid for anything related to our time together. The next morning came with that particular kind of quiet that follows a confrontation. Everything suspended, waiting. I made eggs. I read the paper. At 8:40 there was a knock. Not Nicole's knock. Nicole knocks like she's the building inspector. This was Daniel's knock. Tentative. Almost apologetic before anyone opened the door. He looked tired. He sat down at my kitchen table without asking, which he'd done since he was 7 years old. And that habit, that one small normal thing, made my chest ache in a way I hadn't expected. "Mom, last night was really bad." "Yes," I said. "It was. We had to call Marcus from Nicole's office. He fronted us the $520. It was humiliating." I looked at my son, this quiet gentle man who'd somehow become smaller and smaller over the years of his marriage, like a plant moved away from the window. And I said, "The humiliating part wasn't the bill, Daniel. The humiliating part was that your wife told me not to eat at a table I'd booked and paid for. And you said nothing." He wouldn't look at me. He said Nicole was stressed. He said she didn't mean it the way it sounded. He said we needed to get along because family is family. Psychologists have a term for this pattern, enabling. When a person consistently deflects accountability for someone they love, she didn't mean it. He was having a hard week. You have to understand her background. They are not keeping the peace. They are teaching the other person that there are no consequences. Daniel had been teaching Nicole that lesson for 3 years at my expense. I slid a folder across the table. "I want you to look at this." Inside was a 2-page document. An itemized lease agreement for the in-law suite. $1,400 per month. Fair market rate for that neighborhood. Plus a proportional share of utilities. Electric, gas, water. Estimated at $210 monthly. First and last month's deposit. 30-day notice to sign or vacate. Daniel stared at it like it was written in another language. "Mom, we can't. We're saving for a down payment." "You're not saving," I said quietly. "You went to Cancun in February and Scottsdale in April. You bought Nicole a $900 bag for her birthday. I know because she left the receipt on the kitchen counter. Those are not the spending patterns of people who are saving. And that, by the way, that right there, is how financial boundary violations work in shared housing. When someone lives rent-free, they don't just save money. They reallocate it. Someone else's generosity becomes someone else's lifestyle subsidy. The law is clear that a property owner has every right to set fair market terms at any time with proper notice. I was not evicting anyone. I was simply establishing for the first time a real arrangement. Nicole appeared in the doorway. She'd been upstairs listening. I could tell by the way she arrived too quickly, already coiled. "You're not doing this," she said. "I am," I said. "We'll move out, okay?" I said. She'd expected that to land like a threat. It didn't. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known because she'd never bothered to understand me as a person rather than a fixture, was that I had already started rebuilding something. 3 weeks earlier, I'd enrolled in a ceramics class on Thursday evenings. I'd called my college friend Diane, whom I hadn't spoken to in a year because Nicole made comments about Victoria's needy friends. I'd started walking again, 2 miles every morning, and I'd remembered that I liked myself out there. The energy I'd been spending managing Nicole's feelings had to go somewhere. It was going back to me now. 2 days after the lease conversation, Nicole's mother Barbara showed up. This was not unusual. Barbara visited often, always unannounced, always. Treating my kitchen like a hotel lobby. But this time she and Nicole went into the small sitting room off the main hallway, the one with the antique sideboard, the one where I kept Gerald's mother's jewelry box and some silver frames. I was gardening. I came in through the back door. The jewelry box was open. Barbara had a brooch in her hand. Nicole was wrapping a silver frame in a dish towel from my kitchen. I stood very still. Then I said, "Put those down." Nicole's voice was bright, unworried. "Oh, we were just looking. Mom thought the brooch was so pretty." "Put them down," I said again. "And then both of you leave my house." There was a scene. There is always a scene. Nicole cried. Barbara claimed they were just admiring. Nicole said I was paranoid, that I always assumed the worst about her, that this was a perfect example of why living here was impossible. I want you to pay close attention to what I did next, because this is important. I did not yell. I did not match the energy. I said, "You have 30 minutes. Then I'm calling the non-emergency police line to report that I found someone handling my property without permission." That goes on a record. Was I bluffing? Partly. But here is the legal reality. Taking another person's property, even picking it up with the intent to remove it, can constitute the beginning of theft, regardless of your relationship to the owner or how long you've been in the house. An owner has every right to document this and involve authorities. The moment Nicole and Barbara understood I would actually do it, something shifted in the room. They left. That afternoon I called a locksmith. I had the lock on my private apartment, the main floor, my space, changed. Daniel's key no longer worked. I slid a note under his door. "If you need to speak with me, please knock. I'll answer when I'm available. Access to my part of the home is by my invitation only." He knocked that evening. He looked crushed is the right word. Like a man who'd been trying to avoid choosing a side for years and had just realized the ground had shifted under him anyway. "Mom, this is too far. Daniel, your wife and her mother were handling my property without my knowledge or consent. The trust is gone. What you're seeing isn't me going too far. It's me finally setting a limit." He stood there in the hallway and I could see him processing the distance between who I used to be, the woman who absorbed everything, apologized for inconveniencing people, with her own presence, and who I was now. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "You start by stopping the excuses." I said. "Good night, Daniel." I closed the door. It hurt. I want to be honest about that. It hurt in a specific physical way, like pressure behind the sternum. Boundaries are not painless. The people who tell you that just set limits is easy have never had to do it with someone they love. But I also knew, and this matters, that every time I had backed down before it had cost me something. A piece of my dignity, a piece of my own home, a piece of the woman I'd been before Gerald died, and I'd started shrinking myself down to fit into the space Nicole left me. The financial pressure worked faster than I expected. With $1,610 a month in real housing costs, their lifestyle became immediately visibly unsustainable. Daniel started biking to work because they couldn't justify both car payments. Nicole stopped ordering in every night. The designer bag stopped being discussed. I also stopped making Sunday dinner for the household. This was, I'll be honest, psychologically harder than the locksmith. I had cooked Sunday dinner for 31 years. It was identity, not obligation. But the Sunday after the jewelry incident, when they came downstairs and found me sitting alone with a salad and a book, and Nicole said, "What, no roast?" I looked at her and said, "I decided everyone could take care of themselves." Seemed to work well at Cypress and Salt. She went back upstairs. I heard the Postmates notification 15 minutes later. By the 5th week, the negotiations were over in every practical sense. Daniel came to me on a Saturday morning, calm, "No, Nicole," and said they'd found a 2-bedroom apartment in Millbridge, $1,350 a month, move-in date in 3 weeks. I said, "I think that's good for both of you." He nodded. He looked not angry, something more complicated than angry. "I'm sorry," he said. I should have said something. That night at the restaurant? Yes, I said. You should have. We didn't hug. But we didn't not hug, if that makes sense. Something was left open deliberately, like a window. They moved out on a Tuesday. Quiet, methodical, no drama. Just boxes, a rented van, Nicole not making eye contact. I stood at the window and watched the van pull away and felt relief, yes, but also something quieter and harder to name. The particular kind of sadness that comes not from losing something good, but from finally being honest about how long it had been gone. Within 2 months, I had a new tenant in the upstairs suite. A woman named Carla, a physical therapist, 41, with a cat named Biscuit and an absolute respect for shared walls. She pays $1,400 on the first of every month, keeps the hallway clean, and once left a small succulent on my doorstep with a note that said, "Thanks for the good vibes." I put it on the kitchen windowsill next to my ceramics project, a lopsided bowl I made in Thursday class, which is the ugliest and most satisfying thing I've made in years. My son and I talk now, not easily, not constantly, but we talk. Nicole is civil on the phone. Something about consequences making clarity that no amount of conversation ever managed to make. 3 years of saying, let it go and keep the peace, had taught the people around me that I had no limits. 3 months of enforcing them taught everyone, including me, exactly who I am. The house is mine again. The quiet is mine. The Sunday dinners are mine, and sometimes Diane comes, and sometimes Carla joins us, and nobody tells anyone not to eat too much. Because everybody here paid for it. Everybody here belongs.